What goes around always comes back around, and we are here to show you exactly how it happens. Dive into these intense, heart-pounding stories of karma in its purest form. Don't let the mystery pass you by. Subscribe now and never miss a single moment. I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter the moment I heard my husband's voice carry through the open window. He was out on the back patio with his friends Marcus, Drew, and their colleague Philip. The four of them settled into the patio chairs I had picked out, drinking whiskey from the bar cart I had stocked. I had just come back inside to grab another round of appetizers I had spent 2 hours preparing. "Claire's been writing this interior design thing pretty hard lately," my husband said. I heard the ice clink in his glass. "Honestly? Between us? I give the whole business another 18 months before she's begging me to bail her out." Someone laughed. "I think it was Marcus. She doesn't have the instincts for it," my husband continued. "Never did. She's good at the aesthetic stuff, the pretty pictures. But the actual business side? That's not her world." I stood very still in the kitchen. 14 years. 14 years I had been married to this man. I had put him through the last 2 years of his MBA when his parents cut him off. I had co-signed the loan for his first commercial real estate deal because his credit wasn't strong enough to qualify a loan. I had done his pitch deck for the Harmon Group presentation, the one that became the foundation of his entire portfolio, because he kept freezing up and I stayed up until 3 in the morning rewriting it in language that actually made sense. And I was the one who didn't have the instincts. I picked up the tray of bruschetta. I walked back out through the sliding door with a smile on my face. "Here you go," I said, setting the tray on the table. My husband looked up. Something shifted briefly in his expression, just a flicker. The way a person looks when they're not sure how long someone has been standing behind them. "Thanks, babe," he said. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I looked at Marcus, at Drew, at Philip. They all had the same expression, slightly too relaxed, slightly too casual, the practiced nonchalance of men who knew they'd just been caught. "Actually," I said, "I need to make a call. You all enjoy." I went back inside. I walked to the bedroom, closed the door, and sat down on the edge of the bed. The strange thing was that I wasn't crying. I thought I would be. Instead there was this quiet, clarifying sensation, like a fog I hadn't known was there had suddenly lifted. I had been making excuses for small moments like this for years. The offhand comment at his firm's holiday party. The time he'd corrected me in front of his mother and then told me later I was being too sensitive. I had called all of it nothing. Sitting on that bed, I understood for the first time that nothing had been quietly becoming everything. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, the daughter of a woman who ran her own alterations shop out of our garage for 22 years. My mother cut fabric at 4 in the morning before we woke up for school. She kept 2 sets of books, one for the business, one for what she called her invisible account. A separate savings she maintained entirely on her own that my father didn't know about and didn't need to. "It's not about distrust," she told me once, when I was about 15 and found the second passbook in the lining of her sewing bag. "It's about options. A woman without her own money is a woman without choices. And a woman without choices isn't really free, no matter what her life looks like from the outside." I thought about my mother a lot in the weeks that followed that patio conversation. I had started my interior design business, Strand & Co., 4 years earlier, the same year my husband's commercial real estate firm, Kelleher Property Group, had its first significant expansion. I had taken on projects slowly, at first residential work, referrals from neighbors and friends. Then a boutique hotel in Nashville that changed everything. Then a regional hospitality group that hired me for 5 properties in 18 months. By the time my husband was dismissing me to his friends on that patio, Strand & Co. had 4 full-time employees, a waiting list, and had been featured in 2 national design publications. He knew all of this. He had seen the invoices. He had been to the Nashville hotel opening. He had told me he was proud of me. But what he said to Marcus and Drew and Philip when I was in the kitchen was what he actually believed. I didn't say anything to him that night. I served dinner, I laughed at the right moments, I said goodnight to his friends at the door. I was very pleasant. But the next morning, while my husband was in the shower, I called my attorney. Her name was Patricia, and she had been my attorney for business matters for 3 years. I had never had reason to ask her about anything else. I need a referral, I told her. Family law. Someone excellent. There was a brief pause. Are you sure? She asked. I'm sure, I said. She gave me 2 names. I called the first one that afternoon. What followed was 4 months of the most careful, deliberate work I have ever done in my life, and I have designed the interiors of 47 commercial properties. The first thing my divorce attorney, Sandra, told me was to document everything. Financial records, asset histories, contribution timelines. She also told me, very calmly, that in many cases the most important preparation happens before the other party knows anything is coming. I went back through 7 years of financial records. What I found was not surprising, but seeing it laid out in black and white was something else entirely. The down payment on our house, my savings. $94,000. The bridge loan that kept the Kelleher Property Group solvent during the 2019 cash flow crisis, my business line of credit, $210,000, which I had told my husband I'd taken as an investment in our shared future. The renovation of his office space, my project, my vendor contacts, completed at cost because I had called in favors. All of it documented. All of it traceable. I also discovered something I hadn't been looking for. My husband had a second email account. I found it by accident. He had left himself logged in on the shared laptop we rarely used, and a notification came through while I was using it to pull up a client invoice. I didn't read the emails. I closed the laptop and called Sandra instead. Don't touch it, she told me. Don't read it, don't forward anything, don't screenshot anything on his device. But tell me what you saw. I told her. All right, she said. Here's what we're going to do. The account, as it turned out, contained correspondence with a business partner named Garrett, a man I had met twice at industry events, who I had always found vaguely uncomfortable in a way I couldn't name. Over the previous 14 months, my husband and Garrett had been in the process of restructuring the ownership of 3 Kelleher Property Group assets in a way that would have made them significantly harder to classify as marital property. Sandra called it pre-divorce asset concealment. She said it was not uncommon, and that the people who did it were rarely as careful as they believed. My husband had not been careful at all. There was a woman in my husband's office named Joanna, his executive assistant for 6 years. Someone I had always been polite to and genuinely liked. About 6 weeks into my preparation, she called me. I want you to know I'm not comfortable with this, she said, before she told me anything. But I think you need to know. She had been present at a meeting where my husband and Garrett had discussed the asset restructuring. She had taken notes, as she did for all of his meetings. She had filed those notes, as she did for everything. She said she wasn't sure what she was watching happen until recently, and that once she understood it, she hadn't been able to stop thinking about what she should do. You've always been kind to me, she said. He hasn't always been kind to either of us. I thanked her. I gave Sandra her number that same afternoon. My husband had no idea that any of this was happening. He continued his routine. He had dinners with Marcus and Drew. He made comments about my work schedule being ambitious in a tone that meant something else. He asked me once, over dinner, whether I had thought about scaling back Strand & Co. Now that the hospitality contracts were getting more demanding. I think you might be spreading yourself thin, he said. I told him I would think about it. He nodded, satisfied, and changed the subject. I had, by that point, already quietly transferred my personal accounts to a bank where we had no joint holdings. I had retained Sandra on a full engagement basis. I had documented the asset concealment with Joanna's cooperation and Patricia's guidance. I had also, on Sandra's advice, begun keeping a private record of incidents, not for the divorce proceedings specifically, but because Sandra said that patterns mattered and that I should be the one to define the pattern on the record, not him. The incident at the Regional Architecture and Design Awards happened on a Thursday evening in early November. My husband had agreed to come as my guest. Strand & Co. had been nominated for a Commercial Design Award, the Hargrove Prize, given by the Regional Design Council, which I had spent 3 years trying to get noticed by. My team had worked extraordinarily hard on the Belfield Hotel project that earned the nomination, and I was proud in a way that felt almost physical. We were seated at a round table with 2 of my clients, a journalist from a local design publication, and 2 members of the Design Council. Dinner was pleasant. My husband was charming. He was often charming in public, which had taken me a long time to understand was a different thing from being kind. When they announced the Hargrove Prize and called Strand & Co., I stood up. The room applauded. I walked to the podium, and I gave the speech I had prepared. I thanked my team by name. I thanked my clients. I thanked my mother, who was watching via live stream from Columbus because her hip had been bothering her and she couldn't travel. I did not thank my husband. It was not an oversight. I had thought about it carefully. In 14 years, he had never once thanked me publicly for anything I had contributed to his success. I decided that evening to simply tell the truth with my silence. When I returned to the table, the applause was still dying down. My husband leaned over to me and said, quietly, in the tone he used when he wanted to sound like he was being reasonable, "You didn't mention me." I looked at him. "No," I said. "I didn't." He was quiet for a moment. "We're going to talk about this later," he said. "Actually," I said, just as quietly, "I don't think we are." Something in my voice must have been different from what he expected. Because he looked at me, then really looked at me with an expression I had not seen before. Not anger exactly. Something closer to recalibration, the look of someone who has just realized the ground beneath them may not be as solid as they assumed. I smiled at the journalist across the table and asked her about the Design Council's upcoming fellowship program. My husband and I drove home separately that night. I told him I had to stay and speak with a client. He left around 9. I stayed until nearly 11, talking with my team, taking photographs, feeling something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized had been tight for years. When I got home, the house was dark. He had gone to bed. I sat in the kitchen for a while, in the house I had paid for, in the kitchen I had designed, under the light fixture I had sourced from an artisan in Vermont. I thought about my mother in her garage at 4 in the morning. I thought about the invisible account and what she had called options. Then I went upstairs and slept the deepest sleep I had managed in months. I served him with divorce papers on a Monday morning, 3 weeks after the awards ceremony. My husband had left for the office. I had stayed home on the pretense of a client call. Sandra's process server arrived at his office at 10:15. I know this because Sandra texted me when it was done. He called me 4 times in the next 2 hours. I let all 4 calls go to voicemail. The first message was disbelief. The second was anger. The third was something that sounded almost like grief. The fourth was measured careful, the voice of a man who had just spoken to his attorney and understood that the situation was more complicated than he'd initially assumed. "Claire," he said, in that fourth message, "we need to talk about this reasonably. There are things here that are more complicated than you might realize. Please call me." I listened to it once. I forwarded it to Sandra. Then I called my mother. "It's done," I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Come home this weekend. I'll make your grandmother's soup." I cried then, finally, for the first time since I had sat on the edge of that bed 4 months earlier and felt the fog lift. Not from sadness exactly, more like the specific relief of having carried something heavy for a very long time and setting it down at last. The divorce proceedings took 8 months. My husband's attorney was competent but had not anticipated the scope of what Sandra had prepared. The asset concealment documentation was thorough. Joanna had kept meticulous notes, as she kept everything, and Patricia had worked with Sandra to establish the contribution timeline going back to the MBA loans and the Harmon Group pitch deck. My husband had believed, as people often do when they underestimate someone for long enough, that there was nothing to find. There was quite a lot to find. The final settlement included my full equity in the house, which I subsequently sold and used to fund the expansion of Strand & Co., reimbursement for the documented financial contributions to the Kelleher Property Group, and a division of assets that his attorney described, in a moment of candor in the hallway outside the mediator's office, as not what we were hoping for. I was awarded the Hargrove Prize. The certificate hangs in my office, next to a photograph of my team at the Belfield Hotel opening, next to a small framed note in my mother's handwriting that reads, "My husband kept the Kelleher Property Group, diminished." The Garrett partnership dissolved during the proceedings. It had been, as Sandra predicted, built on assumptions that didn't survive scrutiny. Marcus and Drew still work with him, as far as I know. He is doing fine, I think. I simply stopped making his success possible. In the spring after the divorce was finalized, I hired Joanna as my operations director. She is extraordinary at her job, which I had suspected for years and can now confirm. She reorganized our project management systems in her first 6 weeks and found us $40,000 in billing inefficiencies we hadn't noticed. I should have left sooner, she told me once, over coffee in my new office, the one I designed myself, top floor, light from 3 sides. We both should have, I said. She laughed. It was the kind of laugh that holds something complicated and then releases it. Strand & Co. now has 11 employees. We have completed projects in 7 states. We were shortlisted for a National Design Award last fall, the kind I used to read about in trade publications and tell myself were for other people, more established firms, people who hadn't started in a home office while also making dinner. My mother visited in April. We went to dinner at a restaurant my team had designed 2 years earlier. The host recognized me at the door. "It's so good to have you," she said. And my mother looked around at the space, the lighting, the textures, the way the room felt both open and intimate at once, and then looked at me with an expression I will not try to describe because I don't think I have words that are large enough for it. "Your grandmother would have loved this," she said. I thought about the garage in Columbus. The sound of the sewing machine at 4 in the morning. The invisible account in the lining of the sewing bag. "I know," I said. "I learned from the best." A few months ago, a woman I know, a friend of a friend, someone I'd met at a professional event, reached out to me. She was in a situation, she said. Her husband had made some comments. Her name was on fewer things than she'd realized. She wasn't sure what options she had. I gave her Sandra's number. I also told her what my mother had told me at 15, standing in a garage that smelled like fabric and possibility. A woman without her own money is a woman without choices, and a woman without choices isn't really free, no matter what her life looks like from the outside. That piece of advice cost my mother nothing to give. I still drink my coffee in the mornings by the window. Different window now, my apartment, a place I chose for myself, every piece of furniture a decision I made alone. It is quieter than the house was. I thought I would mind the quiet more than I do. I don't mind it at all. 14 years is a long time to share a life with someone. I don't regret all of it. I learned things. I built things. I became sharper than I might have otherwise, because when you are perpetually underestimated, you are given the choice between believing it and proving otherwise, and I have always been more interested in the second option. My husband once told his friends I didn't have the instincts for business. He said it in my kitchen, in my house, at a bar cart I had stocked, on a patio I had furnished. I have thought about that sometimes, over the last 2 years. When a new contract comes in or a project earns recognition or Joanna sends me an end-of-quarter report that makes me sit back and feel something warm and solid in the center of my chest. He was wrong about the instincts. He was wrong about most things, as it turned out. But I am grateful, in the particular way you can only be grateful for things that hurt you into clarity. That I was standing in that kitchen when he said it. That I heard it clearly. That I set down my coffee mug, picked up the appetizer tray, walked out to that patio with a smile on my face, and started, very quietly, deciding what came next.